Okay, so I am presenting the last chapter that I have to do for you guys, which is chapter 3. Um, you'll need to let me know when you can view all this stuff. Admitting Miss Roberts. All right. Great. So we're going to get going with chapter 3 as other people return to class or come back to class. I'll mark them present as required. So chapter 3 really is going to take us into an exploration and a little more detail of the relational leadership model. So the relational leadership model is the model that they're proposing in this textbook um, for your consideration in building your own personal leadership philosophies. So we'll start to refer to it as the RLM model, moving through the course of the rest of the program. So in terms of dealing with that, we have to remember that the focal point of the relational leadership model is the nature of the relationships. And of course, what we saw from the previous theories we looked at, we also have to take into consideration the nature of the context in which these relationships are being built. So the model is going to focus on the importance of the type of relationship we develop between leaders and followers, and that relationship is supposed to be a communal type of process, and we have to pay attention to the context in which we're establishing those relationships. So, for example, in a classroom setting, the nature of a relationship is a little different to where you work, for example. The nature of a relationship in that particular environment is a lot more different to what will happen in the classroom spaces. You might have a little more collegiality going on there and so on. As opposed to that, for anybody who's involved in any kind of community-based activities, maybe in your where you live, or somewhere something peripheral to where you live, or maybe you're just part of a larger network, like an online network of similar thinking people, you might find yourself operating in a different way. So the nature of your relationship there is going to be different to that as well. So even if you think about the nature of your relationship in family, among family members, as you spiral outwards in terms of those who are closest to you to those who are more distant relatives, the nature of your relationships change based upon the context in which you have those relationships. And so this is why relationship model is going to focus its attention on two of the primary activities, which is the nature of the relationship and the context in which that relationship is going to occur. So that's going to be part of the um, the, the guidelines that they're going to be looking at. So if we remember the definition for leadership, so we start in this model with defining leadership as a relational and ethical process of people together attempting to accomplish positive change. And we can understand why the theory starts with a definition that defines positive change and not just overall change, because we know that therein lies a bit of a challenge in some instances when we're looking at things. So the model focuses on 5 different components that we're going to spend some time. In fact, the vast majority of this presentation is built around these 5 things, these 5 components. So the RLM model is purposefully is purposeful, sorry, and builds commitment towards positive purposes that are inclusive of people and diverse points of view. So I'm reading this really badly. Empowers those involved, is ethical, and recognizes that all 4 of these elements are accomplished by being process oriented. So the takeouts from these are the purpose, inclusivity, the empowerment, the ethical values, and the process orientation. So this is a representation of those 5 components in a visual format taken from the textbook, of course. So we see that the process is kind of surrounds everything. The purpose is the core value or the core center. Empowerment, inclusivity, and ethical values are all inside of the whole process of looking at the model that we're trying to to determine here. So the purpose is going to be one of the first things that we're going to pay attention to. Now, again, the model warns us that it is not a model that is going to describe current leadership practice, but is an aspirational model that is proposed in developing and supporting a healthy, ethical, effective group. Now, the reason why some of these models exist is because current leadership does not inspire people, or doesn't seem to have, as we looked at before, when we were looking at the current issues with in the first chapter, that leadership oftentimes that we see around us, has a lot to be desired, and therefore we're gonna try to look at this from the position of what if we tried this model and see if this would help us develop better leaders and a better a better circumstance in which leadership finds itself operational. More importantly, the more people we put out there with this model in mind, the better chances we have of a more positive type of leadership techniques infiltrating the systems outside there, so that eventually, we start to get people in higher parts of the organization exercising all or some aspects of the relational leadership model as part of their what we want to say toolkit that they're going to be utilizing when they're going to be dealing with their leadership issues and leadership opportunities. All right, so the first element here has to do with purpose, and the first thing we want to look at is the importance of having purpose. Purpose gives us focus, and focus is required in order to drive any sort of organization moving forward. If there is no specific purpose that we're getting together for, then we have a problem sometimes in determining, well, why are we getting together? What are we going to be doing? So that's one of the reasons why in this class, for example, we have the situation where the the course outline identifies the function, purpose, and the course requirements and what we're hoping to achieve from the course. Those are things that are really important for us because it gives us a purpose and a focus that we're going to be looking at. Now, like um, like with what this model is talking about, this course is driven by the learning outcomes or the vision, but is not driven by the person who's teaching the class. So the fact of the matter is that, very simply, it doesn't matter who teaches the course. It matters because the person in the driving seat is using the same vision and purpose or focus. Now, one of the issues we have with a lot of organizations out there is that they can become more position driven rather than vision driven. And that's simply because a lot of businesses started with, key people starting in a very humble beginnings and building an organization from their personal viewpoint, from their personal position of where they want to go. Once that person steps away from the organization, there's usually going to be some sort of schisms attached to the transition, which then creates problems for the future of the organization. In fact, some companies, if not those that are more position driven, have a tendency to fail after the transitioning of the initial founders of the organization. As opposed to that, if it's vision driven, there's a chance that it will stand a better opportunity because the vision is what's driving the actions of the organization and not the person who's sitting in the position. And that is a critical element that we have to recognize. This model focuses on purpose, and the purpose is usually going to be what drives the organization forward or drives the group or the committee or whatever it is they usually have. If any of you all have been part of any formal or informal committees or organizations, hopefully you've had experiences with those organizations generating some sort of vision or mission statement. So, for example, most of you seem to be working Ms. Ramdas, welcome. So most of your organizations, if not all, have a vision and mission statement. Are you all aware of your vision and mission statements for your organizations? That's a question, huh? Okay. Mr.
Good
Batiste?
evening, sir.
Hi, Alana, yes?
I am aware, however, I don't know if I have.
Well, well, but how did you meet that? How did you meet it?
So it's posted on probably every wall in most of the departments.
It is, right? But more importantly, did they point it out to you when you came into the organization, or were you there when it was being
No,
created?
sir. No, it was always there.
So, all right. So you're going to be somebody I'm going to come back to because something should have happened when you joined an organization and there's a vision and mission statement that exists in the organization. So I'm going to be coming back to you in relation to what took place there. Anybody else willing to share if they're working in an organization or participating in some sort of group activity outside of work, outside of home that has a vision or mission statement, or probably doesn't have a vision or mission? Nobody's willing to share that on that?
So, what if you're working in the legal field? So,
Same
like
thing.
our vision, our statement is let justice be done though the heavens fall.
Wow. Okay. That's a all right. So that's a nice vision because it's very uplifting. Um, what's your mission statement to go with that? Do you know it?
Not offensive.
All right. So yeah. All right. So the vision is where you want to be, right? Um, in the future, and the mission is what you do to get there. That's generally how we kind of explain it in our management studies. I'm wondering if your vision statement might be a bit too lofty in the sense that, God forbid that the heavens fall, right? Uh, it'd be interesting to see if that's the case. But I guess, again, a good vision inspires us to try to achieve something that is not easily attainable. All right. So it's what is it, Christopher? Let justice be served.
Let
Even
justice be done though the heavens fall.
wow, that's really out there, boy. Huh. Yeah, I think of something a little more practical in terms of a vision statement. But when we do the chapter on vision and mission statements, you will be able to assess in a better sense whether or not your vision is necessarily a good one or not. So we'll see how that works out. Because there's um, that heaven falling kind of thing is a little um, pie in the sky. I think. Anyway, coming
Uh,
back to
so,
my
so I I agree with you. I agree with you on that in that aspect. But I think it's just literally it's a literal translation of a Latin term.
yes, it is that. That's why I'm wondering if it's not just um, one of the tenets of law practice that they came across that, and it sounds nice to make a vision statement out of it. Doesn't sound
So,
very.
so, but strange enough, I have actually, I mean, I've been working in the field for 8 years, so meeting persons from other chambers as well. It's the statement, the mission statement is along the same line because they tend to use the similar the quote as well.
I understand. It's just that okay, so when we look at vision and mission statements in terms of how they should be constructed and so on, um, we'll see whether or not you'll do an assessment as to whether or not it falls into to those guidelines. All right, and we'll work from there. All right. So remember that, huh? Um, there's a group that's actually going to be handling that. That'll be Um, Vision and Strategic Direction on March 29th. You need to make sure that's with Archibald, James, and Ramsey. They're going to be presenting on vision and strategic vision. And when we do, um, I think teams and groups will also meet some aspects of vision and mission there too. So we're going to be paying attention to what you're thinking about there. All right. So the point that the relational model is making, however, is that organizations ought to be vision driven and not position driven, and um, that is the takeaway we're looking at. Now we met this knowing, being, doing cycle from before in the first chapter, and what we're going to do is revisit this because this is part of the purpose area. So remember the process that it spoke to. So individual leaders need to know themselves. So therefore, in order for you to determine a purpose and work towards that purpose, you need to start off by knowing yourself. Then you need to be aware of self and how others operate and they think. That's the being part. And then of course to act on that information. So that is part and parcel of the understanding self that is going to be handled in the next week under chapters 4 and 5. Both of those are actually going to tackle understanding self and understanding others. The doing part comes with practice, basically, as we spoke about before. So we're going to be looking at that later on as well. So we want to start with that, and there's a reason for it, as with everything. The reason for those components is that these are interrelated, and they don't. It's not a one and done. So I've started a process with you in one of the assignments to do a self-analysis, and that's just the beginning phases because if you have really paid attention to yourself over time, you have changed a lot of how you feel and a lot of how you think in relation to what's been going on in your own personal development. Now, that is something that you have to pay attention to because we're not, we're not a close-ended type of person. We hope that as we get to understand ourselves better and as we start to develop, we become more knowledgeable ourselves, more knowledgeable about how things work. We evaluate often what we're doing right and wrong, and therefore we start to make influences on going back and correcting what we think is wrong, adjusting things, making some sort of changes and adjustments, and therefore it's not really just only a circular, but I would say a spiral type of thing that we're looking at because every time we go through the process, we should be growing in awareness and developing a broader perspective of life around us. Because everything we do as leaders or as subordinates in an organization, we should be broadening our experiences, broadening our perceptions, and whenever we make that circular movement of knowing, being, doing, we should, come back around and really be spiraling outwards, indicating that we have broadened, we have increased our understanding. We have, although sometimes we kind of shrink back, especially when we're under a lot of stress and stuff like that. We tend to shrink back a little bit, focus on core, and then we come back out again and we start to expand and that type of stuff. So it's not a smooth, straight, linear relationship that we're trying to work out here. So again, the idea is that as you do things in life, as you learn more, as you acquire more information, generally, it starts to change your actions, and those actions begin to influence the way you behave. It broadens your thing. It means, therefore, that your perspectives in life are widening. So, the knowing, being, doing is the core activity required from the individual in terms of determining who they are, and that actually shapes a lot of the development of the purpose that organizations can start with, especially if we start with a brand new organization. This person needs to understand this. Now, Palmer from the textbook uses the phrase, instead of knowing, being, doing, he uses head, heart, and practice, and he uses this to describe teaching. And if there's a disconnect, so head means technical information, knowing what you're doing and so on. Heart means your passion understanding and willingness to learn and all the other um, intangibles that go into the practice of your work. And of course the practice is what shows when you've pull all these things together, what you do in the classroom and so on. Now oftentimes if there's a disconnect between head, heart and practice, or head and heart in particular, so I've come across in particular instances, the most common thing I come across is a lot of very technically oriented individuals who are really good with their material, they know their stuff, but they lack the passion for teaching. And it shows in the way in which they practice. And unfortunately, I've had a couple of people that I've met through my education system, my life in education, who have that problem. And some of you, I suspect, have met one or two, hopefully not too many, people who are in the teaching service, and unfortunately this tends to be a little higher in the secondary school system. You meet a lot of young professionals who are coming into the profession of teaching, coming in there with no idea of what teaching is about, and they realize too late sometimes that I really don't want to be here, and it begins to show in their practice in terms of or sometimes they're just there because it has a good salary at this point in time, and I get good holidays, or so they assume, and that kind of thing. So I don't know. Have any of you all ever come across that type of teacher? Hopefully not. Anybody? Nobody?
Thankfully, no, sir.
All right, Lauren. What about, I see Miss Roberts' hand is up. No, you just can't put your hand up, and you got to say something.
Yes, sir. I have came across. I don't know if I just bad lucky, but one too many times I have.
Okay. Do you mind saying what level you met it? Was it at tertiary level or secondary
This
school
school, tertiary.
as well? Yeah, I met most of mine's in tertiary level education when I was at University of the West Indies. Wow, the amount of senseless people I met there. Sometimes it was unbelievable to come across that there but then again, um, the culture of teaching in well the culture of education in the University of the West Indies is one of lecturing, not teaching. So there's a huge disconnect. So literally, when you go there, you kind of get involved with having to read for your own degree, kind of thing. But I met one or two afterwards in terms of like my nephews. My brother died and left his nephews behind, so we had to kind of pick up for him in terms of looking after his children while they were in school. And I met a couple of my nephew's teachers who literally in the classroom said, I didn't want to come and teach. I wanted to go and do something else. I wanted to be an engineer and that kind of stuff. I just here until I could get a better job. And they will say these things to students, and then it shows itself in the practice that they engage in. And I remember one particular one, she was a math lecturer, and it always seems to be math, for whatever reason. Math seems to be the one that's infested with people who have, they don't want to teach because they want to do something better. But I don't know. And they're very dismissive about it. And I don't think they ever see the impact that it has on students when they get that level of disconnect taking place there. So this is why this is so important. The knowing, being, doing is, if we are not paying attention to improving our knowledge base, being engaged and understanding other people around us, it starts to show itself in our practice and what we do. And that process is the key thing that you as an individual in any form of leadership or subordinate um, context need to pay attention to. Because one of the first things we always tend to think about when things go wrong is we always look at other people and say, well, this went wrong because so and so is doing this and so and so is doing that. The first thing we ought to do whenever things go wrong is pay attention to what did I do that precipitated this behavior. And especially, I want you all to take a hard look at some of the relationships that you've had in your life that didn't work. These could be romantic or family-based relationships. And I know one of the things we commonly do when it comes to that is that this person did this and they caused this and whatnot, but it didn't happen in unless you're dealing with some psychotic individuals. It didn't happen in isolation of actions that you were involved in. So that's one of the things of analysis that you want to pay attention to in terms of how people react to what I do, um, by paying attention to what I'm doing and how they're responding. So if you find, especially in romantic relationships, um, if you find that you keep on getting the same outcomes, like a lot of men and women find themselves always having the same types of experiences regardless of who they're with, one of the things you have to do is to check and see what you're doing that's calling that type of action back on you. So that's one of the things you want to pay attention to. It's the same thing that's happening when you're in this knowing, being, doing. So it's a never-ending process of you understanding more about yourself and adjusting your behavior and adjusting what you're doing to be able to to grow from that place that you're talking about. All right. So if you are credible, now what develops your credibility has to do with what you exhibit as your skill levels. People be willing to work with you, and that's an important element that we want to pay attention to, because the opposite is of people whose hearts are not it is also those people who fake being in a job by saying they're qualified, but they really can't do the job. That's another phenomenon that we come across. And it's unfortunately a number of people who are, I want to say, certified to do certain things, but they actually can't do it. They can't make a connection outside there beyond what they are certified to do. So I'm hoping that some of you all may have come across that particular instance. The part where the passion is lacking, fine, we understand that one. So what about the person who is there, but their technical expertise is lacking? This tends to happen, especially in highly sensitive or highly technical areas that changes very quickly. So people in IT, for example, if they don't stay concurrent with developments going on around them, there's a tendency for them to get stale in the job, especially if they are up. That's one of the reasons why lecturers or teachers generally have to be constantly monitoring the environment, teaching themselves, attending workshops, and so on, because you have to remain current. Because from the time you disengage from the world around you, you won't be current anymore. That makes sense, guys? And it can impact upon your credibility because there'll be there'll be the times where you just simply don't have the information necessary and the technical know-how that is required for the job that you're working in, or the organization that you're working in. And there are some people who would fake that, okay, um, and that's where the problems come in. Because if you were honest and said, well, I'm not too clear about this one, I have to do some work on it, um, then that's a different issue, because then you're going back into the knowing process and you've seen a gap and you're going to work towards you know filling the gap. But unfortunately there's some people outside there that I've met, who have these gaps but will not admit to not knowing things. It's like a Trinidadian behavior, you ask anybody, you know where this place is, they wouldn't tell you no. You'll get all kind of weird directions, it'll take you all over the place, but they will not tell you no, I don't know where this is. Have you ever experienced that, getting directions from people and they don't know where you're going, they don't know what you're talking about? Taran? Taran? Mr. Archibald? Yeah.
So in
That
light
happened.
of what he was explaining before,
Uh-huh.
one gentleman explained to me. He said, "Fake it till you make it."
Fake it until you make it. That's the worst advice I'll give anybody. Yeah. I remember I got that advice from when I just started teaching. Um, I remember a teacher said to me, "Do not tell a student you don't know something." Um, you know, so it's the same kind of thing. Fake it until you make it. Unfortunately, I had a much more senior teacher um, who told me, he said that is the most ridiculous thing you could ever do because students will know when you don't know something, regardless of how well you might pretend that you know about it. Be honest. And I found that approach to things was much better because students would, people generally would respect you if you say, listen, I'm not sure about this. Give me some time, I'll go look at it and research it for you and come back. That is um, a much better approach than fake it until you make it. Yes, Miss Hunt.
Yeah, so what you were saying there was actually the way that I would usually operate in scenarios, which I think makes much more sense because I get the opportunity to learn something. So usually if somebody comes to me and says, ask me a question, I would be like, you know what, I don't know the answer to this, but let me find out
Right.
and I will get back to you because now I've learned something new. I've gained some info and some skill.
Right, that makes sense. That's a mature approach to it. But one of the panicked approaches to a circumstance where you come across not knowing something is is that you you try to fake it because or you pretend that you know what you're doing, but the danger with that is that you can cause a certain amount of damage with it. In terms of teaching, that has happened. I've seen teachers who've pretended to know certain things and they've given partial information or incorrect information, and it takes a lot to fix that afterwards. Um, and that can be problematic across. Not can, it is problematic and it's quite dangerous. And of course, it's disingenuous to really be doing something like that to people around us. All right, so now in the knowing, being, doing, there are four skills that they talked about here that are really essential for leadership. Interpersonal skills, conceptual skills, technical skills, and tactical skills. Now, the technical skills are probably the easiest ones to acquire. These are whatever expertise you need to have for the position that you're working in or the organization that you're working in. All right, so those are probably the easiest to acquire and become certified in. The difficult ones are interpersonal skills and tactical skills. Those are what we refer to as soft skills. It's one of the reasons why a lot of managers from technical fields find themselves being sent to do management studies. So a lot of engineers, for example, will go on to do an MBA. And the purpose of doing an MBA is to actually develop these interpersonal skills and tactical skills. So they will do things like organizational behavior, where they're going to go through a lot of the theories of org behavior and motivational theory, um, a whole pile of uh, wow. So like, in fact, a lot of it we are actually covering in this class as well. A lot of interpersonal skills. The ones that create the problems are the effective communication, because a lot of people see communication as a styles based thing, and that's my style of communicating, that's how I do things. But honestly, if you think, for those people who are communication students here will understand that effective communication requires a lot of effort and you can actually shape your style to meet the requirements of the organization that you're going into. All right. Sorry about that. Kind of frog in my throat there. Um, Shivanan, welcome.
Hi, sir. Thank you. Sorry,
I
everyone.
No problem. I expected that people would be coming in. All right. Um, the other one, so tactical skills is also another area that a lot of management spends a lot of time working on. Negotiations, consensus building, meeting management, all those kind of things are tactical skills designed to get people together. So you'd realize that of the four sets of skills there, The hardest ones are those that dealing with other people. Those are the hardest ones that you're going to be tackling. Conceptualization skills is also one of the challenges, primarily in Trinidad and the Caribbean experience, because creativity is not something that is encouraged in our current education system. And for those of you who've gone through the education system, you'd realize that once you get into a classroom setting, generally you're told shut up and listen. That's that because your and a lot of your creativity is drummed out of you during that period, and quite early on. So it's discouraged that creativity. Some schools, fortunately, especially in primary schools, would encourage a lot of creativity, but from the time you get into the secondary school system, that creativity is just drilled out of you. Why? Because it becomes easier to manage you in a large grouping of other students. So again, this is part of developing technical skills, part of getting the knowing element, part of the training and information that you need to have as a leader or potential leader to be able to grow into the position and develop as the position going forward. The being, of course, means knowing what values you attribute and attributes you define as a leader. So here we're talking about your value structure. How do you treat others? What are the things that you hold to be you consider to be right and wrong? Those are the kind of things that we you have to pay attention to. And of course, based upon your well, the doing will actually reflect some of the being part, especially your value structures, because your actions are generally going to be governed by what you perceive to be right and wrong in the world around us. So, do unto others as you would have done unto you is the kind of thing that kind of works in this situation here. So, um, and interestingly, the last phrase here, character gives you the courage to do what is right, regardless of the circumstances or consequences of what the rest of the world is doing around you. So that's a strong statement there made by these two authors, that if you have good character, you will do the right thing regardless of what everybody else around you. But as we start to explore ethics, we'll start to see that that's not as easily done or not as easily perceived as we think. All right. Character and knowledge are not enough, of course, to be doing this. Doing attempts to produce the results that are designed to meet the purpose of the organization, create change, and influence others to act. That's what doing is all about. So, oftentimes we come across leaders who are unwilling to act because they have a fixation with perfection. Now, I have worked, unfortunately, with people like this. They don't do anything until everything's in place. And as a result, what tends to happen is nothing. Because perfection is the ideal, and you're never going to find an ideal circumstance to launch any particular activity, program, project, whatever. Um, and if you wait for that perfection, you're gonna get nothing done. More importantly, when you have this fixation on perfection, and here we have to consider this perfection is not OCD. It's about looking at making sure all of the things that you think you need to get something done being in place. What that shows or messages to other people around you is that you will not tolerate anybody else making errors, um, especially if they are errors that we can't predict until we start to get into it. So this zero defect type of ideology means we don't take chances. So the whole organization begins to reflect that walking on eggshell kind of nonsense. So you don't do anything because you don't want to take a chance to be ridiculed or brought up because you didn't do this because these things are not in place. You're not supposed to be doing this, and you have that kind of intolerance coming top down from the organization. If you've ever worked in an environment like this, it's highly stressful, and as a result, what also one of the things that came with that was when people further up the chain started to say things like, "Well, why aren't you getting these things done?" and you try to say to them, well, we don't have this and we don't have that, and they'll say, so you could do something else in the meantime. Then they start to blame people lower down the organization, and that blame game starts, especially if you have to report back and forth. So it's a kind of really frustrating circumstance to have to operate under when you have that. Now, the opposite is also true. Huh? There are some leaders who will approach any kind of problem or any kind of project with a lot of flexibility, and that can in itself lead to an abundance of creative activities to say the least. um, so that the more imperfections that are there, the better it is for them, because they can what's the word I want to use? Capitalize upon the imperfections for their own personal gain. That's the other extreme you can have. So and that means well, any slapdash thing could work. That kind of attitude now comes through the system. So that's kind of like the other side of the spectrum to this failure to act because of perfection. You have acting based upon imperfect information and capitalizing on that for your personal gain, and kind of hiding in the cracks in between. So some of you all may have experienced that type of things in your working environments in particular. All right. Now, the whole thing about this is that we have to, as a leader, if we know we want to get people to act in a responsible manner, we need to be creating a situation in which, as a leader, we are open to learning together collectively. So leaders promote learning in three different ways. One, through your own learning. So if your employees and your subordinates see you engaging in learning activities, training development, that kind of stuff, then they're going to be encouraged to see you as somebody just like them, who's learning the ropes as we speak. Helping others to learn, of course, collaboratively learning together is a useful technique that can be utilized, and by shaping and contributing to a culture that promotes learning. So as a leader, encourage, hey, get together and let's do some work study activities. Let's join this program, and I'll help pay for it, that kind of stuff, and kind of get that kind of thing going on. Or hiring consultants to come in and do some training for the staff, and you sitting in with them and doing the training alongside them. Those are the kind of things that leaders can do to promote learning, and dispense that perfection action. That's something that's really important, that that has to happen in order to create that type of environment in which people are willing to work with each other in doing that self-development, moving along. So this goes to speak to the purpose of the leadership models. So we're talking about, specifically in the RLM model, we're talking about positive change. And the the importance of having a purpose that is defined is that we all share in a particular direction in which we are moving towards. And more importantly, it has to be a shared vision. So here we talk about the difference between personalized vision and socialized vision. And again, this kind of comes back to something we spoke to before: vision driven and person driven, or individual driven. Personalized vision has a tendency to be more of a individual based, can be very selfish in nature, and it's I focused. Socialized vision, and generally what happens, so it's here. Usually a person with legitimate authority announcing the dreams and plans and imposing it on others. Now, participants have no choice in the matter. They have to follow this vision because this is the person who set it up. This is their business, that their money spent to set up the organization. So therefore they need to make sure that you're doing what they want. Um, that doesn't lend itself to commonality. So as a as opposed to that, developing a socialized vision is building a vision from amongst the group's members, recognizing that if people understand, like, and help to develop the shared vision, they would have a vested interest and be willing to put in more effort to accomplish it than if you were simply just a participant. Now, there are issues with this because you can't keep on, well, your vision and mission statements can't change every daily week and it can't change every time you bring somebody else inside the organization. So it means that once there's a setup for the organization, socialized vision can't continue. Um, well, there's an aspect to socialization of your vision that has to take place in an organization after the vision and mission is set, and that's what it was talking. I think it was Alana we were talking to about what took place when you came into the organization. If some form of induction took place, that's going to be a critical element that you have to pay attention to. All right, it's important that if you have created a socialized vision in an organization, you've spent the time and effort to get that done, and I can tell you that developing a socialized vision is a difficult thing. It's easier in smaller groups, but with large organizations, it's very, very difficult to come across that socialized vision. You, you, you have to spend a lot of time and invest a lot of effort into the development of getting everybody's point of view and sharing that point of view, and gathering all that information to be able to get that sorted out. Now the problem that comes up though, um, the concept is that a good leader doesn't just impose their own vision on other people. They try to bring other people into the picture to get what they think, how they feel about it, and move towards a collective vision moving forward. Why? Because that's easier to sell than if it was just my particular point of view. All right. So it's not just based upon my position. It's based upon what we all think about where the organization is supposed to move to. Now, the the purpose of vision is to give us something to attain in the future that's supposed to animate, inspire, and transform purpose into action. Now, so this is what was his name? So Christopher was talking about. It's supposed to animate and inspire. So in the legal field, I guess um, what was it again, Christopher? I have to write that down. What was it again? Just
Let justice be done, though the heavens fall.
right. Yes, I have to look up that. Let justice be done, though the heavens fall.
Yes, sir.
Huh. So, all right. So the question is, does that vision animate you?
So,
And
so it
obvious,
does it does to an extent.
it does not extent. Were you part of the process of developing that vision, or you came and
I,
you met it?
I met that this.
Right. So let's ask this thing. Did you in or did your organization engage in um, sort of orientation process or induction process with you into the core values of the organization and bring that vision and mission statement to you and explain to you what they're looking at and that kind of stuff, or what
So
happened?
it's well that has been ongoing. It is not just that there was just one
Right.
session, but it's an ongoing training
Process. Right.
process.
Excellent, because that is the best way in which you do it. It's not a one and done deal. We oftentimes come back and revisit our vision and mission statements, try to make sure that people are really understanding what we're doing, checking to see if we should be making any changes ever so often. Are we, missing anything here? Can we make an improvement to our vision and mission statements that would, encompass what we're looking at and what we're facing in the real world around us? Because again, it's supposed to be forward looking, right? As opposed to that, I think Alana was talking about what she experienced. And did you get that type of induction training, Alana? Was it Alana who talked about that?
Yes, sir, was me. Initially, no, but 10 years after, yes.
10 years.
Yes,
Yeah.
upon first arrival, I didn't have no orientation or anything. We were just put in there and guided accordingly by the department. And then 10 years after, I had an orientation and it indicated the vision and mission.
Right. Was there what precipitated the induction 10 years later?
I can't say I'm not sure, but I think all staff had to go through it.
I wonder why. Did you have a change in upper executive leadership?
Could be so,
All
could be.
right. That's generally one of the functions of upper leadership when they start to see gaps in what was going on. Do you mind telling me what private or public sector is this?
So it's Southwest Regional Health Authority.
Right, so it's public sector. No, you just have to say public sector. You have to say it out loud. Come on, man. We need to make our people
Should I
hear.
say okay?
You remember it's being recorded. Huh? All right. Yeah, I think that has to do more along the lines with changing leadership um, in the organization during particular periods that you would have that sort of re-examination of your vision and mission statement and people doing some little workshops about it ever so often. What that does is that it kind of refreshes people who are there in the organization already, kind of reminds them of what their purpose are, gets a you know you get a deeper understanding and we kind of hold to that vision and mission because visions don't change often. A vision will change if there's really significant changes in the environment or the industry. Um, so that kind of thinking. But again, the purpose or the function of this is to give us something that guides our action. And we have to really get behind it. If we don't get behind it, we don't feel any sort of encouragement and motivation to want to work towards those changes. All right, and we want to make sure that our purpose is something that we feel good about. It's not something that's supposed to be dangerous or harmful to other people, or we feel ashamed about it, that type of stuff. All right, so that's why we always talk about our vision and purpose being something that's positive, not just to ourselves or the company. That's also very short-sighted, but also a vision that is positive for the entire for everybody around in and around the organization. That's going to be something that we have to pay attention to. All right, and it's that although all right, so a short-term vision might be to become the so like Digicel has had a vision statement that they had in a tagline um, to become the number one um, cell phone provider in Trinidad and Tobago. Now that's a short-sighted thing because okay, so when you get there, what next? You tell me. For those of you who are familiar with what's going on with the mobile industry here in Trinidad, what's B Mobile's tagline? I could never remember those things.
Life is on.
Life is on.
That's one of them.
Uh,
And
that-
funnily, that's one of my clients.
right, and what is their no, that's B Mobile, right? Not necessarily. So there are different entities: TSTT, B Mobile.
There's more than one Be Mobile and TSTT also.
Right, yeah, because they have different types of markets that they're working with. So they
Yeah,
have subdivided the market, and you have the bundles that they have running now. Um,
that's under their Bigo.
right, and then you have different niche markets that they're tackling. So each one of
Yeah,
those markets have to be investigated. They have to look at what the vision is for that particular part of the market. But I'm thinking
correct.
of what Digicel did, and they had when they first entered the Trinidad and Tobago market, their objective was to become the number one provider of um, services in Trinidad. And what happens if you achieve that? Then what? You understand what I'm talking about? And
Yeah,
that
correct.
that's kind of short-sighted. A vision needs to be something that's more awe-inspiring, that takes you further out, that is not only beneficial for the company itself, because that is kind of selfish in itself. I want to be number one, right? So yeah, and then what? How does that help me as a customer, as a citizen in the country who may be using a competitor? Because I've never used digital actually, and that's the point I'm trying to make. your vision and mission statements ought to be something that is good for everybody, inclusive of the environment that you're working in and around. That's something that's really important to pay attention to. So, as I said before, there is a group that is going to be looking at developing that. Oops, Jameen. That is going to be working with that in particular detail in one of their presentations. Hi, Jameen. Um, Miss Jones Palmer. Welcome. I know you're running late. No worries. Okay, so oftentimes when we have to make the changes to our vision and mission statement, it's about making changes in the organization. Jermaine, your mic's on. All right, thanks. All right, so here's where another aspect to management comes in and leadership comes in, and that's about working towards making positive changes in the organization. So, um, 10 years ago, when Alana started to get into this induction exercise, probably there was a change in leadership, and leadership felt as if people weren't paying attention to what the goals and objectives of the organization were, and they need to do some refreshers in it. And in fact, what they would have found out was that a lot of people came to work, started to work, been there for 10 years, and never actually knew what the visual mission statement of the order. Was that something that took place? Did they do a kind of, what's the word I want to use? Like a survey of you guys to find out about those things?
No, sir. But as I said, it's posted in almost every department now.
Well,
So they probably,
usually,
I don't know, I can't recall the survey to tell you the truth if they did that,
uh,
because I
you know
wasn't a
how
part of it.
you know how a leader does that. Sometimes they just kind of go and introduce themselves to people, and in talking to them, you find out, what's the and they make out that statement. Do you know the mission statement for the organization? And they make this kind. I remember when when we were going through accreditation, we used to get attacked in the students too used to get attacked in the in classrooms and elevators and stuff by particular members of the executive asking us questions about the vision and mission statement of the organization. It was really comical sometimes. And our vision and mission statements are long. They're not tagline type. They're pretty lengthy and involved. Has a compound sentences like crazy in it. Um, because we were trying to encompass so much in it. But I remember us having real fun with that vision and mission statement. One president actually came in and he created a tagline um, where he started to call the college Transformers because he had this kind of weird thing. And it kind of stuck with us. And I think you all might be familiar with this. Transforming um, transforming the nation one student at a time. You all ever saw that tagline?
Yes, sir.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I remember, sir.
Um, yeah, that was a an attempt to kind of simplify what we were looking at doing, um, and it kind of worked because that tagline was a lot easier for us to for people, especially students, to remember what was going on. Anyway, now when you're making change, it means that you have to work at um, making adjustments and getting people to move along with you. So again, this is going to require a fair amount of motivation from leadership to be able to do this. Now, change is difficult because once we get involved in the day-to-day activities of our job, we have a problem when people come and bring changes to us. So the cycle or the theory talks about unfreezing, changing, and then refreezing. Now, the unfreezing is the hard part. And during that period, if something doesn't trigger the event, um, it's going to well, it has to be some sort of event has to push us towards it. So that trigger event. So let's think about the pandemic and how that triggered a number of changes in organizations, and for some people it wasn't a positive change. They didn't see the change of going online as being positive, both from student sides as well as administration and faculty. So along the way, what took place was um, uh, reluctance from certain people to want to move into the online environment. And obviously, as a result of having to make that change, and to make that change quickly as well, because we were able to make the transition within about 2 months or so, when that came on, um, to go fully online from I remember all my classes were face to face and they all went fully online in 2 months time. That was a massive amount of change in a short space of time. um, but along the way we lost some students who didn't like the online environment. We lost some faculty who weren't comfortable going online and they didn't like the online environment. We lost some administrative people and we lost some staffing because there was no need for them anymore because we weren't having this quantum of individuals coming into classroom spaces. We also lost or sort of gave up building space and landscape ready, landmass, or real estate as the case might be, during that period as well because we were no longer using those buildings and we were spending money for empty buildings basically. Um, so a lot of physical changes took place alongside. Now, the theory tells us that when you make that change, you kind of refreeze the structure and adjust to the change. But modern different theorists look upon this as an opportunity to not refreeze, but just kind of create an environment that keeps the attitudes towards changes more open, or what they refer to in the text as a slushy kind of feel to the organization. So you're kind of semi-permanent in the organization, so that you could flow backward and forward. So you remain in a more dynamic situation than you were in the past. So if you look around us now today in the post-COVID environment, we find ourselves in a situation where we've stayed with a lot of the changes that took place, which of course is we think is kind of refrozen. But in all honesty, even in this environment here, it has to be adjusted on a regular basis and checked and make sure that we're doing the right thing. Now, for those people who were unable to make the transition, a lot of those organizations no longer exist. Um, for some organizations, remote working actually is a solution for big problems that they've been always trying to handle. And the problem with that was administrations had to adjust to managing staff from a remote basis, um, rather than the kind of line of sight supervision that took place before. Um, I don't know how a lot of your offices that you may have worked in treated with it. For those of you who might have been involved in one end or the other of it as workers, managers, supervisors, or maybe even as students. So, like the younger guys here, when you made the transition into online classes for your secondary schooling, some of you all were probably still in school back then. Anybody here who was in school, secondary school, and you had to make that transition?
Yes, sir.
So what happened? How did you feel about it?
It was around CXC,
Right?
so
That
it
was
was
stressful for you
difficult. Yeah, it was stress. I didn't really like to travel to school and things, so I was happy
to be home.
until the experience come in. Yeah.
Yeah, and that's
Yeah.
one of the things that you'd find happening now. The two fallouts there because so that's the school children were home, but more importantly, if young children were home with free time because you weren't in class all day long. You're probably there for maybe 6 or 7 hours, maybe 5 hours for the day. After that, you had free time, right? If you weren't a responsible young man, Mr. Batiste, what might you have done?
So
So he wouldn't be in university.
What he want? Sorry.
If he didn't be productive, if he wasn't productive, he wouldn't be in university.
That's true. That's true. But you know the
Yes, I
different.
think
Go ahead.
so. Some of the classes, uh, the teachers didn't really have any classes for them. When I say that, I mean like barely anybody used to show up. So the
I.
nurses say email, whatever WhatsApp group,
All right.
and they'll send work. And then some teachers used to run you down. Like they'd call everybody parents, tell them, hey, they have class at 10 o'clock. Make sure they're in the class.
Right. Well, those are the teachers who are passionate about your education, although some others may have had a more relaxed attitude towards it and ascribe to you some degree of responsibility, which is the case, huh? Because you are really responsible for your own learning. So Kazim jumped in there to defend you, Mr. Batiste, saying that you know you wouldn't have been in university if you didn't you weren't a productive student. So were you, Kazim?
Yes,
I,
sir.
I guess by default because you're here as well, right? Now
Yes.
the some now for secondary school students that was all well and good, but then you also had primary school students having to stay home, and that led to a big challenge because it meant that parents had to be home as well, and they had to monitor what was going on as well as work from home. So then you had everybody's at home, at work, and in school in the same property, in the same household. And that leads to a bit of challenges because, you know, you might have a lecture going on one end, and um, you know, unless you have a headset on and you're quiet by yourself, your mother might be on the phone or your father might be on the phone with the company dealing with issues there. And that led to some interesting developments that took place that a lot of households had to adjust to. So the remote working was also an element that helped because they, of course, people had to be, you know, home to look after children, especially younger children, because you couldn't leave them unsupervised. And the employers had to make some adjustments to the way they treated with at-home work and that type of stuff. Not a lot of employers were really happy about that. And those that were unwilling to make those sort of changes found themselves um, in trouble later on because a lot of workers had no choice but to stay home um, because they didn't have anybody else to look after their children and so on. And worker employment that was not able to go on an online basis and have remote work was was you know really suffered from that type of changes. So the thing about it is that when you're making change, depending upon where you are in the change process, um, as a leader, you have to remember that not everybody is going to see that change as being something that is useful to them, especially in the context of what is best for the organization. So that's something that's going to happen. In fact, there's a presentation that is going to be done about change, and that's the last presentation from Mr. Maraj Kazim is in that one on Suknanan. Leading change is a chapter that you're going to be paying attention to that whole change process that we're speaking about here. All right, so we look forward to seeing that coming up there. All right, so so once we start to get involved with changing, it that is one of the things that transformational leadership actually has to address on a big way, because most times what you're trying to do is to work through the change with the organization, with the people around you, and try to get them to agree to come along and make the change. And it takes time to make that type of change. Um, Unless, as I said, there's something that is motivating swifter changes. Generally, survival, you know, keeping your job, that kind of stuff. I remember we were really patient with the organization when we started to make those switches during the pandemic because everybody was so worried about what was going on that they tried to make sure would have that we were keeping each other safe because we unfortunately lost a few faculty during that time frame to the virus. We lost some students too. It was a really heart-rending time. We lost some administrative people to those things as well. So I mean, everybody's kind of what's the word I want to use? Um, we were really being patriotic towards the organization and really trying to work beyond the call of duty, um, to make sure that the organization survived the transition. So the level of commitment by the existing staff during that period was enormously, something that the college really enjoyed a lot of commitment, long grueling hours of online work, preparing
So,
stuff for
and well,
students.
people was a lot of people was dying too, so it was
Yeah,
scary
it was scary too. So I mean,
because you
every
could think you would die just now.
yeah.
That's how it
So
was.
when you're facing environments like that, of course, a change process might be easier to put in, and that's a dangerous thing, and because if the change is not a good change, and there's a lot of anxiety attached to it, and people are making this change because they perceive it as being good for everybody, but there's a back end to it, that's something. I mean, one of the things we thought, was after we went through the pandemic and stuff like that, we'll start back face-to-face classes, and then you guys spoke. Because when we tried to transition back into face-to-face classes or blended classes, you all said no. Any class that we set up as face-to-face, the the what was the word? The registration for those classes was pitiful. We had to shut them down all the time. Um, you guys wanted the online environment, and I could understand why. It's a lot more convenient. You save time, not having to run from work to back to school and then back home. Um, so the I guess the ease of getting your work done, having a place to come and see your stuff on a regular basis is going to be really important for you guys. So those were some of the changes we experienced. Um, this is the point I was making in terms of Alana's position. When joining an ongoing group in which a vision has already been established, new participants have to determine whether they can connect to that vision or feel that they can shape the continued evolution of the group's vision over time. And that is something that as an organization, if you already have established ideas and established purpose to the organization, you have to indoctrinate the new people coming into the organization with that vision and mission statement. Generally, in large organization, that's the responsibility of the human resource department, um, to try and make sure that they induct new students, or I shouldn't say new students, but new participants in the organization. That's one of the reasons why we have an orientation for students when we are when we have brand new students coming into the institution. Though the amount of stuff you're bombarded with during that short space of time makes it kind of impractical for you to memorize our vision and mission statements and that kind of stuff, but it's usually going to be provided for you there for your information, um, and then hopefully you start to see it being put to practice. All right, so the second aspect besides being purposeful is that the relational leadership is inclusive, and there's a number of things about inclusivity that we have to pay attention. So let's look at this. Let's look at this definition here. Being inclusive means understanding, valuing, and actively engaging diversity in views, approaches, styles, and aspects of individuality, such as gender, sexual orientation, or culture, that adds multiple perspectives to a group's activity. Now, this of late, and has always been, the biggest challenge to anybody's leadership objectives in and this model. This is going to be the biggest hurdle because there is so much, um, there's so many of these so-called new changes coming in into play, and the focus here is that we have to be open and inclusive to everybody in the organization. Now, why is it important that we are open to all of this diversity? It's because the more diversity and perspectives that we have approaching issues and problems within an organization, the better informed we're going to be. Because unless you walk the road that that person is walking, you can't or will not be able to perceive these issues in the same manner as other people. People from different cultures, different countries, different genders, to yourself. The problem with a leader is to be inclusive. And this is especially becoming a challenge these days with the explosion of both sexual orientation and gender diversity that we're starting to experience. So gender is no longer just simply male and female, but you have a whole spectrum of I, gender identifications that people encounter, and sexual orientations as well. The question is how can you go about being inclusive, and how would you deal with it in terms of being inclusive to those individuals? So, any comments here about this, about the challenges that you might see yourself approaching here? Anybody? Has anybody ever experienced working with somebody who has something that really upset you in terms of their look upon life, their something about their sexual orientation, their gender identification, or some aspect of their individuality that upset you, and still you had to work with them? Any of y'all ever encountered that type of issue?
Yes, sir.
How did you go about dealing with it?
Hmm. Well, the person was my supervisor, and how to say, it had clashes. It had clashes, and I realized that you cannot judge people by your standards, and I let it go.
That's
But it
good.
wasn't like a gender issue. Basically the person was just lazy and didn't want to leave. And I think that's something that just ticks me off generally.
Well, I don't know if that approaches what we're looking at. But then, if you have a supervisor who's lazy, and what's the impact that their laziness has on you? Does it mean that you have more work to do?
No, because I will do I I think with the continued inaction by her, I just did what I was. The company would have gotten less from me when they could have gotten more.
All right. So that's the impact of having a negative individual in charge, and
Yeah,
their you
you
see
wouldn't go
their
the extra
value.
mile. You would
Yeah,
just
yeah.
give what.
So their
Mhm.
value structure is impacted upon, and it won't only be you; it'll be other people in the organization. They would just do what's necessary and nothing more.
Exactly.
Right. So we see immediately there the person's knowing, being, doing aspect here impacting upon how people responded to them, and it directly impacts upon work being done in the organization. Obviously, Jermaine, is that a public sector or private sector company?
So state, state.
State run? Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
So it's one of those state run companies,
Yes, it is. It
right?
is. And
So
then the thing is, they don't check people like that. They just move them sometime.
right. So again, you're dealing with people who perceive themselves to be in a job that they can't get fired from, basically, and that then has an impact
Exactly.
upon their behavior. All right, but that's
Stop.
that. All right, but thank you for sharing, Jameen. That is not necessarily what we're looking at in terms of diversity of individuals or individuality. So nobody has a point experience that they're willing to share with this. Have you ever worked with somebody who was openly gay? Um,
Yes,
So
sir. I have.
And how did it work? F-
Well, I mean, I was like in the exact same because I was in the medical unit, but there was like an administration. So,
Correct.
well, it was call center. So we used to like go and use the printer and thing.
Hmm.
Um, at first, that is a stereotype thing that I like to joke about, joke around about them and thing. But I will just see him as a person,
Well, that's a good,
just
healthy,
like,
a good um, method that you can utilize. De-emphasize the difference, focus on the fact that they're human.
yeah, yeah,
Alright, alright. Now, there's not a lot of people who are saying anything here. It's just that one of the issues that comes up with this is that it is probably going to be one of the really critical issues that you have to pay attention to. And what can happen that that does happen in organizations is when a leader's views and belief structures begin to um, conflict with concepts coming from this area of inclusivity, especially when we're dealing with gender and sexual orientation, because those are like the big ticket ones that we can look at. There's so many different things as well that we look at. Now you have to remember this is a relational leadership model built in a US environment, or constructed with the US context. When we start to look at this from our own personal perspectives here in the Caribbean, gender and sexual orientation is still massive issues in terms of how we treat with people, um, especially older individuals in society have very um, close-minded attitudes towards such differences. So this is where is here the kind of things like is Adam and Eve not Adam and Steve, and those kind of statements being made that trivialize a lot of the things that these people are experiencing, and individuals are experiencing, and it can create challenges when you start to get into a situation where you have to interact with individuals who identify as maybe binary, or no, some of these things I'm not sure what they mean, but they identify as a trans woman or trans man, that type of stuff. And you find that that is going to create challenges when you have to be inclusive, because your personal attitude towards the individual and their choices, their life choices, is going to kind of irk you. And this is why we have to pay attention to the inclusivity factor of the model, because it is the one that's most critical that you're going to have to be looking at. Um, and it's probably one of the more difficult ones. I mean, we understand purpose, but inclusivity is the biggest challenge, and that has a tendency to have a lot of problems with it. All right. Um, in some instances, it's one or two individuals, and we'll start to understand what we mean by being a little more inclusive. So inclusivity wouldn't mean, not only bringing in their skills, but also listening with empathy and communicating with civilly. With now, inclusivity doesn't mean you have to agree with their situation, but you have to understand why they may be thinking the way they are. And the hard part about it is that it's difficult for us to come to grips with somebody who's feeling that they are a woman trapped in a man's body, or a man trapped in a woman's body, and wanting to express themselves as female or male despite their assigned genders at birth. Those are things, unless you've walked that experience, you have no clue how that feels. More importantly, living life, growing up like that, and then facing the amount of abuse and probably um, ridicule that they faced throughout their life because of the way they behaved. I mean, I remember when we were going to school, and when I was in primary secondary school, and any boy was kind of effeminate, when especially when you're getting starting to mature and become teenagers and stuff, and any boy coming up as being slightly effeminate or any kind of things like that, we were um, horrible with those individuals in terms of teasing and bullying and that kind of stuff. That's back in my days. I don't know if that's actually changed much in the society around us. But the whole point about it is that we have been very difficult to deal with as individuals once we come across people who are different to us, and we actually need to move forward and be more inclusive across the board, act with more empathy, be more civil with these individuals. Unfortunately, these days, what I'm seeing is from both sides of the coin, so to speak, um, is that there's a lot of aggressiveness attached to this now. So that if you inadvertently refer to somebody as a him when they identify as a her, I've noticed that there's a lot of defensiveness and a lot of aggression coming up now, and I think that's not helping the situation of being inclusive. And how some people absolutely refuse to accept that that's the case or not. Those are things that we're gonna have to treat with and deal with over time, because as we are so open to the influences of external countries around us, we are going to find ourselves inundated with more and more instances where these things become important. And I remember early in my life when I was teaching, I came across a couple of I remember this was a serious problem for a pair of young ladies in a class I was teaching. Um, and I remember they basically what they did, they caught the two of them in a kind of compromising situation. But these are two adult ladies, young girls, I should say, teenagers, or young teens. And you know, somebody from administration came to me and said I need to talk to them and discourage them from what they're doing. And I said, well, no, I can't, because that's their lifestyle choice. I can't go and interfere with that, because you know they're at an age where they're probably experimenting and examining those aspects of their lives. They're finding a safe space in the school to do something about it or to investigate it or whatever they're doing. That's a lifestyle choice. I can't, unless they're causing damage to other people. That was not something. But I remember the administration was coming on like a ton of bricks. Go and talk to them. You had to go and tell them that they can't do that. And it was like, fortunately, an executive leader from the organization came down and said to that particular administrator, no, this is students have freedom of choice when it comes to how they exhibit that. As long as they fall within um, the code of conduct, fine. If they choose to be have one particular lifestyle choice as opposed to another, that's not our area to interfere with, kind of thing like that. I remember that was really problematic for us. Now, if you create an environment as a leader of inclusiveness, you're going to find that it's going to breed that whole cycle of inclusiveness across the entire organization. Pretty much like what Jermaine was talking about. You have a leader who's promoting laziness and they don't care, then that promotes that type of behavior across the board. Similarly, if you have an open door policy and you try to encourage people and you listen to them and you're sympathetic towards them and you're empathic, you deal with people on a civil nature, then that's also going to be the kind of climate you're going to create in and around you and within the organization. So leadership actually helps to generate organizational culture, and that's something that they're going to be. It's important for us to look at. All right. Um, so we're getting into the area of empowerment in a little bit, but again, the um, the whole concept really is to be inclusive, encourage these individuals. Now, so one of the things about encouraging individuals to make sure that you are not forcing them into your mindset. And that's something here that they speak about in terms of dominant cultural norms. One of the things that we are faced with in most places, anywhere we go, is that there's a dominant cultural norm that exists in that organization, or that exists in that that particular grouping, and that norm is going to kind of pigeonhole everybody into that area. If we are to encourage any form of um, diversity in the organization, we have to understand that there's a tendency for us to steamroll over everybody with our um, general thinking in terms of based upon the dominant culture. So a lot of times we're not even aware that we are being discriminatory to other people when they come in with different backgrounds and different thinking. So I remember when I first started to go to school, I went to Roman Catholic schools all the time, and my family practiced Hinduism, and I remember feeling very embarrassed in some instances when we were asked to discuss things, or when people would see certain aspects of Hinduism being discussed. It was always in a negative light, because of the nature of the way the school presented. Now, so I remember, like, we used to have religious instruction periods, and if you were non-Catholic, you had a study period. Used to be a lifetime, and a lot of Roman Catholics used to come to that class for study, because they just didn't want to go to those religious instruction classes. It was quite interesting, actually, to see that type of behavior taking place. But again, once you have this dominant culture in an organization, it marginalizes other people from outside of that organization. I remember at one point in time, they need a declaration in the school that you couldn't wear jewelry, so they were allowing chains to be worn by students, and they said the only types of chains you can wear um, um, were of religious with a religious aspect to it. So crosses were okay, that type of stuff. So I remember a friend of mine, um, he went and he bought a big chain with a ohm on it. For those of you who are familiar with that, and started to come to school with that on. And I know the priest and them used to look at that and they used to cringe, but they set the rules up and he just used it. There, there was a whole style. It's just a crack me. He's to do those things just annoy the administration, and take them to the limit with it. But I mean, those are the kind of things that tends to happen when you have dominant culture rolling over everybody. It just kind of squashes differences aside, and we ignore what happens, and that leads to a different type of situation that we start to push people to peripheral ends of the organization, and that is not what we aiming for. Um, we have to use we more rather than I. And in doing so, we have to pay attention to the possibility that we are utilizing terms and assumptions that are ignoring people on peripheral and elements of the organization. All right. When we deal with groups and teams, for the group that's actually treating with that's groups and teams coming up here. We're going to be treating with some of that. That's Jasan, Figaro, and Seals Romeo. Um, they're going to be treating with examining some aspects of inclusivity and inclusion. So when you're making decisions as well, you'd want to use democratic models, but there's a tendency for democratic models to be um, problematic, because what you do in a democratic model is you further alienate people who don't agree to a particular decision. So instead of using democratic systems of decision making, what you want to be utilizing is consensus building models. They're longer, they're more difficult to utilize because of the fact that it's going to take more time. But consensus building is a superior decision making um, tool than that builds inclusivity. So consider what's taking place. You have 10 people in an organization, and consensus means 6 people minimum need to make a decision, and then you have four people who don't agree. So what ends up happening if we had a vote of 6-4 and 4 against, you end up with a situation where you have um, you have four people who are going to absolutely disengage from a decision when you only have a small group of 10 people that need to work together to get things done. Consensus building requires more time because it means you find out from these individuals what are the issues that they're having with the current decision that you're trying to make in terms of the point of view that you're trying to sell. And this means being inclusive to what their issues are, listening to what they have to say, and trying to take into consideration the views that they have. And interestingly enough, if we spend the time trying to develop consensus, we may find perceptions and views that are absolutely something we can't or would not have been able to see unless we included their particular point of view with it. And that's something that is much better. So consensus building will be better because maybe you would find first and foremost a better solution to the problem that you were having, and definitely you'd get more inclusivity. So out of the four people who were still against it, utilizing a consensus model means that though they didn't agree with all or everything that you have to say, they still agree with enough of it to be willing to work towards supporting the work that has to be done, rather than just voting on the idea and just marginalizing people um, to that to that particular thing. Now, when we're being inclusive, we also need to be inclusive to people not directly involved with the organization. So they speak to being inclusive to shareholders and stakeholders of the organization. Now, why is that going to be important? So let me take you to this table so that you can see what's going on. Most times when you're dealing with making decisions about an organization, we tend to focus a lot on what's taking place inside the organization, but we don't spend a lot of time evaluating the people who are directly impacted or by like for example, if the college makes decisions, we always have to meet with our student body, the faculty and the administration, to make sure that whatever decisions or changes we're deciding to make, um, and build support with you guys in relation to that. So oftentimes we always ask you to do the post class evaluation where you're evaluating the course and that kind of stuff, which again I would encourage all of you all to do. We always, when we have to make significant changes, so now we're getting into a new accreditation mode, we're going to call a fair amount of um, focus groups with you guys, to be able to get you to engage with us and evaluate different operations and aspects of the college to get your opinions about things. But it's not only about you guys, we have to also engage the faculty, we have to engage the staff at different levels of the organization, but also we have to engage the people who hire you. So we have to get onto the businessmen, we have to get onto the the colleges, the schools that you all come from. We have to also find out what are their takes on what's going on. So we have to evaluate them. And as you start to work with these external groups, you'd find that there are groups inside there from there who your issues are of low importance to them, and they therefore don't have any, and they don't really care one way or the other. So their support is relatively going to be high, but it's of low importance, so they fall into this low priority area here. Then you have those who are high opposition to whatever change you're trying to make, but it's of low importance. They become problematic because they don't want to, because they have high levels of opposition. They're just going to write you off and say, well, this is not important enough for me to get involved. Then of course, if it's high opposition and high importance to them, then they're going to be fairly antagonistic. What you're trying to do is to make sure that you kind of get people shifted over to high support, high importance, so you get more supportive. Again, this is a matrix that you can simply utilize to evaluate where your stakeholders and shareholders are likely to fall, and that will therefore indicate to you the type of techniques you need to utilize to be able to, engage in that activity. Sometimes you need to put sweeteners into the things to get people involved in those discussions. All right. Question? Yes, Jermaine? No? Okay. All right. So next we move to empowerment. So empowerment is about power, and it means about giving power over to people in the organization so that they can do what they have to do, but also encourage them to want to do what they want to do. So empowerment has two dimensions. It's the sense of self by the individual to claim ownership or claim a place in the process, and they expect that being in the organization, they are going to be involved in decision making processes. Two, it's an environmental conditions that are created in the culture of your business or the culture of the organization to be able to involve people in to participate in decision making. So it means that the organization is breaking down the barriers that tend to block that type of empowerment. Now, again, one of the old school methodologies to to this thinking of empowerment is that it's not something that you want to do, because basically when they talk about power, they talk about power as being zero sum, meaning you either have all the power or you have no power. And power sharing is not something that some leadership models or some people in leadership don't view as something they're willing to share. And that's something that is unfortunate, because they view they view it as all or none, or what is referred to commonly as zero sum. And the reality is that in the model that we're looking at, empowerment gives you more power, although you've given up power. Because people begin to respect you more, and they have a more vested interest in what's going on. Interestingly enough, empowerment also means that you are going to make yourself redundant eventually, because you are preparing people to take over the job of leading the organization. Now, how else are you supposed to make sure that an organization exists beyond yourself? Is through empowerment. You have to empower people to be able to take the reins up and move the organization again with the same vision and purpose in mind that we had from before. So that's something that you want to do. So if that's going to be your mindset, then you have to, one, create the environment, and two, encourage that type of response from people in the organization. Empowering environments are have learning climates. So basically, for you to be able to tell people, hey, take a chance and take charge of some of these things, it means that you have to be open to making mistakes. If, on the other hand, you are not willing to make mistakes, and you're not willing to accept the possibility of failures, then you're going to create a different type of organization. People are going to avoid taking charge of certain types of activities, because they know that at the end of the day they're going to get ridiculed, they're going to get punished, and that's not going to be a good method of being able to empower your subordinates to be able to take more responsibility in the organization. All right, so the root word of empowerment is power, right? So we need to understand a bit about power and power dynamics. So again, just to point it out to you, a lot more details will be dealt with in the chapter 12 of the DAF by Superville, Roberts, and Rogers, who will be dealing with power and influence. They're going to be looking at that on the 5th of April alongside leading change. Right, so you're seeing where all of these things are kind of connecting with what's going on later on in the course. All right, so we need to understand a little more about power. They will be doing it more details. So I'm just going to try and kind of talk about this a little bit. So traditionally, people look at power as being zero sum, or we talked about this before. Conventional approaches really look at one person has power, no, and everybody else has to wait on them. That kind of centralized power is dangerous, and it tends to build a lot of bureaucracy in organizations that make decision making problematic, slows the organization down, and creates a lot of inefficiency. Empowering other people is something that really helps the organization moving forward. Different types of power exist concurrently among people in different kinds of relationships. So Power dynamics would range from power over, that's the autocratic power, power with, that's collaborative power, power alongside collegial power. So um, as a supervisor in an organization, you have autocratic power over people. You have power with people alongside you. That's collaborative power, as well as sorry, no, you can develop collaborative power with people at different levels of the organization, both below and above you in a collaborative approach. That's power with, and of course you have power alongside, which is the collegial approach to doing things. All right, now what we want to look at is positional power and personal power. So there's some power that an individual will get because of their position, and there are other powers that will be ascribed to them because of the individual they are. So we're going to be looking at that in a bit particular thing. So it's really referred to as sources of power. So how do you end up with power, or what are your sources of power? Um, so there are bases of social power: expert, referent, legitimate, coercive, and reward power. So anybody who's done organizational behavior should have come across power and influence. If not, then again, I'm going to say to you, this segment is going to be one of the presentations that's going to be going on here. So expert power is power that people arrive at through their expertise. So they go through all the various forms of training and experience and certification and their education and so on. And that gives them a specific amount of information that gives them um, expertise in an area. So obviously, so sometimes you're trying to get help to do something, you look for an expert in the field. That's basically what you're looking for. So that is expert power. We give over to those people because their power is based upon what they know and what they can do. So that's the expert power. Reverent power, on the other hand, has to do with the way in which people regard somebody in an organization or regard somebody around them. That person is looked upon as having some degree of of seniority, almost like the wise sage. Maybe they've been around for a while, or they've come across with a more knowing persona and awareness of things, and people begin to look to that individual as a sort of guru kind of situation. That's kind of reverence that people give to that individual, and that tends to be something that can only be ascribed based upon the character of that individual. There's nothing legitimate about it. It doesn't mean that he's been given or she's been given that reverence by other people. I know, like for instance, I worked in an organization once, and everybody used to look at this. The word I want to use is matronly woman in the organization. I used to refer to her as mommy, because when you're having a bad day, sometimes you just go to her and you get some and simple things. She make a cup of tea for you. And that kind of give and take. She'll sit down and listen to your problems, and give you a take on what she thinks about it, or that kind of stuff. And mommy was there to kind of help you out when you're rough times, and it didn't matter what it was. It could be work related, it could be non-work related, but she was always there to sit, listen, and hear you out, and that gave that kind of reverent power. Legitimate power, on the other hand, is the power ascribed to you by the organization due to your role. So if you're the manager, then you get a certain amount of power. Now, what you do with this power is going to be important, because this legitimate power is dangerous if you abuse it. So sort of like what Jermaine was talking about. The person is the manager or the supervisor, but because of what they're doing, they've affected their ability to utilize their power because they have done things to undermine themselves. And that's something that you have to pay attention to. So when in that position, they have the ability to utilize coercive power. That is the power of punishing people in the organization for something that they did or didn't do. So there are some sort of punitive types of actions, removal of rewards, kind of something that they're utilizing to punish things. All right. That's coercive power. So reward power, on the other hand, is the opposite of that, where in order to encourage people to do things, they'll be able to, award them some kind of raise, give them some sort of the bonus plaques, that kind of stuff. That's in like extrinsic, and of course intrinsic would be things like support, praise, recognition, that type of stuff that you see. I don't know if you all when you go to certain organizations, you see employee of the month. Well, hopefully there's some monetary gain for them for the employee because these places usually have really difficult uh, work going on there. Um, but hopefully the intrinsic part of it was they put a picture up on the wall and they get made out as being employee of the month, employee of the week, kind of stuff like that. Those kind of things are important because those rewards help to motivate individuals. So this is where the reward part, it gives you power because you're in charge of giving that, especially if you're the manager. So sometimes we may um, you know create our what we call responsible knowledge. So some of you all may be feeling a little naked right now as you're getting ready to prepare your chapters to teach the class. Now, notice I'm not saying present, although I keep on saying presentation. What you're actually doing is teaching the class. So you all need to practice something called responsible knowledge, meaning that you need to know more than the audience that you're going to present to. All right? You may be feeling naked because you've never had the responsibility of teaching course material to in a class before. So I'm pushing you all in a situation here where I'm creating the need for you to create responsible knowledge, and you can actually. And now you see this part here. Conversely, others may attribute some source of power to you without you all knowing what it is, knowing that's happening. For example, when somebody fears your disapproval because you have reverent power. So that's another element that you want to look at here. But the idea here is that you have to teach the class. So I'm giving you power, but you have to show me that you have responsible knowledge when you're presenting your topic. Now, in another instance, we give people power that they didn't really have, and that we kind of misalign that type of thing as well. So that's something you want to pay attention to as well. That sometimes we give power to people unwittingly when they don't need it or they don't deserve it. That's something you got to be careful with too. And later on, I'll tell you how that can happen a little bit. Um, we have a way of undermining ourselves when we give away power by contradicting what we say. We don't trust that we have uh, so like if the experts are speaking about a particular thing and you have a varying opinion, you might not want to say anything because they're supposed to be the experts, right? So you don't want to contradict them, but you have to remember the expert is only speaking from their perspective. They are not necessarily viewing and this is something with IT that happens a lot. A lot of IT personnel kind of behaves in a manner that, well, we know what we're doing. But as a user, they may not be seeing the problems and issues that you are facing because they are not walking that rule. So you have to remember that experts suffer from that myopia, that tunnel vision, because they're looking at it from their expertise, but they're not looking at it necessarily from a user's point of view. So that gives you some degree of power because you're viewing things from a different perspective. All right. All right. So another way in which you could use your power is that you give your power away if we do not say things like, let's talk about that first before we might have some. The way in which you start to use your power is to assert yourself with the power, and that's something that some people don't do. We can also assume that people have power when in fact they don't have it. And I like the example there. When the group, now you all have little groups here, assumes that because you're an English major, you may be the best at writing the group's report. That may be an error. So in this grouping here, you might have some graphic design people, you might have some communication people as well. So you might think that they would naturally have an ability to create good presentations and design good teaching things, and that may not be true. Who knows? Don't ascribe power to people unless they show you that they have the capacity to do it. But it's the way in which we tend to do things. We tend to do that because we have a tendency to believe that if you're doing something else, that you know you should be able to deal with it. All right, so the model that we're talking about here starts to speak to the fact that power is not a finite resource. It is something that can be shared, and the more that you share, the greater your power is, because people will look to you and say, hey, this person is really good to work with, and it makes you more powerful in the organization. Um, some people look at it as a weakness because they will say that you are showing your weaknesses as a result of giving other people responsibility and power to do certain things. So it's not about being indecisive and avoidance of responsibility. That's something that we have to kind of discount. All right. So one of the other things, let's see what I'm trying to deal with here. Right. So sharing power is something that we have to understand, that we have to be careful with it, because if we empower other people to do things, it doesn't necessarily give them the responsibility. So that is the area of delegation, for example. So although you may delegate an activity to somebody else, it does not mean that you're also handing over the responsibility of the task at hand. And a lot of instances happen where people abuse other people by giving them the false sense of, I'm giving you this task as a reward, but then you set them up. And that creates a lot of distrust. So I've had this happen to me, um, where somebody gave me some activities to do and to plan, and didn't give me the resources necessary to really set it up. Didn't fully explain what the context of the preparation was going to be for. So when we came to the point of having to deliver this particular content to somebody again, which I didn't know was something that had to be presented to somebody else, the person was looking at me as if I was talking absolute rubbish, and I was kind of like, what the hell is this about? Because I wasn't aware that this is what this was required for. So in essence, what that person was doing was setting me up to make me look incompetent. And therefore, they had some ulterior motive that was going on. Of course, never trusted that individual ever again in life, right? Because if they could do that once, they could do it all the time. And that
So
type
that
of
was your friend?
sorry, that was
That
a
was your
friend?
friend?
No, that wasn't a friend. That was a supervisor. Somebody I was working with. Right? I never trusted that individual. Even if it was a friend who did something like that, you'll never trust a friend like that either. Would they? Would you? I don't think you would. Yeah. That friend
Experience,
knows.
from experience, no.
It is. And it is a situation that some people tend to do. They want to show themselves as being better, and they do so by taking you down a peg or two and making you look um, incompetent in whatever it is they're trying to do. And that is unfortunately one of the things that a lot of leaders do. They set up employees um, uh, to make them do things, don't provide the necessary resources, and then hold you responsible for it. But the reality of that is, when you do something like that, the responsibility is actually you as the leader. And that's something that a lot of leaders don't realize, because it is in your vested interest for the individuals that you're delegating some responsibility to perform it well, because they're a reflection of your capacity, huh? Not theirs but yours. But you know a lot of leaders have that kind of old school mentality when it comes to those kind of things. All right, so we still have a ways to go. We're running out of time. All right, self empowerment. Of course, this has to do with trying to get people to want to empower themselves, which is create that attitude as to I want to be involved. I want to take charge. I want to take responsibility. Those are things that we try to get done. I think parents are the first set of people who try to do self empowerment. Take responsibility for your bedroom, take on its cleanliness, take responsibility for some action in the house. Look after certain things. Those are the kind of things that they try to encourage you to do it. So empowerment is a little beyond those things. When you go to work, you don't wait for people to tell you to go and do things. You size up the situation and you get there and you start to do work, and you see this needs to be done. You don't wait for somebody to tell you to go and do it. So how do you do get involved with self empowerment? One, first education. All right, discovering, sharing information and knowledge. That's education is going to be part of your self empowerment thing. Taking opportunities to lead, inspiring others, helping others to take up leadership positions, rewarding people with leadership opportunities. Those are the kind of things that you want to do. Structuring your life so that you actually make yourself more prepared for empowerment activities. So you know, trying to be more organized so that you can facilitate, better streamlining of your actions and activities. Networking, that's part of the structuring thing that they're talking about, reaching out there. Changing policies or processes in terms of how to get things done, and moving that forward. As again, something that we tend to do is, we always do things based upon what we were told they need to be done, but is there another way that we could do it that's more efficient? So that's one of the things that you do in terms of self-empowerment. You look at a policy, or you look at a process, and you say, okay, this needs to be changed because I think it can be done better this way and that way. Again, bringing your own expertise to bear on it, bringing those changes forward to the organization so that it it can be considered. That's self-empowerment as well. Providing opportunities for others to take up positions of power, as well as ensuring that you take up the opportunities to take in to take up responsible situations. Mentoring, which is one of the techniques you can utilize to sort of exercise your leadership. Mentoring other people in more junior positions, that kind of stuff, and of course actualization, which is actually acting upon these things to be able to do it. All right. So um, whether or not the organization has to value the empowerment aspect of employees, and this is something that is challenging because if you're working in an organization with a lot of people who have very traditional views of power in the organization, you're going to find yourself in situations where if you attempt to utilize empowerment as part of your techniques in terms of dealing with your staff as a junior leader or junior supervisor in the organization, you might find yourself being ridiculed by other people who don't quite agree with that level of empowerment, and they may in fact be challenged by it, regardless of the fact that it's doing well, because what you're doing is preparing other people to be able to do the job that you are supposed to be doing as well. um, and again, some people will say, well, you're supposed to be doing this, you're supposed to be like, some of you all in this class may be thinking it, I'm supposed to be teaching each chapter, right? So that's one whole exercise in empowerment in terms of the classroom activities, giving you responsibilities and hopefully providing enough guidance for you to be able to do a good job with it. Those are kind of things. Now, we spoke about mattering and marginalization before. I mentioned that when we engage in empowerment, what we're trying to do is we're trying to make sure that people feel that how they feel and what they do matters to the organization. If we don't do these things, and we kind of uh, it's kind of focus on other stuff. What we do is, if we don't bring in everybody and that kind of stuff, what we end up doing is pushing people to the margins, and we in essence therefore marginalize people in the organization and make them feel as if what they do and how they feel about things doesn't matter, because their point of view, their options for empowerment is not something that's welcomed by the organization. That is something that we have to pay attention to. I've seen this circumstance happen a lot with people who work at peripheral ends of the organization. And when I say peripheral end, I mean people who are on the lower end of the organization, like custodial staff, security staff. They're treated with some degree of distance by a lot of the leadership in organizations, so much so that they prefer not to be seen with them, not to be. And I'm pretty certain some of you all have come across people like that. I certainly have come across that in various institutions. I've seen people who are unwilling to even sit at the same table with somebody who might be a maid or a custodial staff member. It's really horrible when you start to behave like that because they feel marginalized. And then, of course, they behave marginalized because they don't believe
So
that their
that's
jobs.
like that's concerning, like the difference between society.
Well, you can have that happening on a wider environment when
Yeah.
you have what is classified as the undesirables in society. Yes, that marginalization
Yeah.
can take place on a societal basis. Here, however, we're talking about it on a organizational level. So within organizations, we have that marginalization taking place as well, but on a microscope, more of a localized scale rather than a macro scale that you're referring to within society. Because yes, we do have that in a major way in our societies where you have a tendency for people to be marginalized by the way in which the leadership of the country operates. So people who are lower income, people living in certain areas of the country are marginalized by the way in which the administration of the country treats them. It's the same thing that happens inside of organizations where people who hold particular types of positions are marginalized by the organization themselves. Um, and you don't want that to be, what you're known for. Let's put it that way. All right, so we spoke about the empowerment environments, and we talked about how you can get that going, and the fact that you have to create a learning environment for that to be operational. So we could kind of skip this moving forward. Anything most new and organizational dynamics, right? So this is something about we spoke about delegation already. That we talked about the nature of trying to avoid setting people up, because at the end of the day, although you may have delegated information to somebody else, the the empowerment, the responsibility still lies with you as the leader, ultimate responsibility. So don't do that, and don't create this feeling of manipulation, unpreparedness, and resentfulness and victimization. You don't want to be doing that, mistreating that empowerment activity. All right, so let's see, ethics. So this is the third element. Um, that we want to look at, and then after this we have to look at process orientation. So we still have about half an hour left. All right, so the relational leadership model focus heavily on ethics and moral values. The reason for this is because coming out of the end of the 20th century into the 21st century, we saw a lot of very negative press about leadership around the world, and their behaviors, especially in financial markets and political markets, political environments. It's still going on today. We have questionable people in leadership positions in international circumstances and situations with firms, countries, all of them behaving in a manner in which they seem to have no value for human life, no value for the common good of people around the world. And as a result, this model is speaking to leaders and followers being driven by really high moral and ethical values. So we need to kind of understand this a little more because this is the cornerstone um, of the organization in terms of the relational leadership model. So much so that we have two presentations on that. We have integrity and moral purpose. That's with Garcia, Franklin, and Nicholas on the 15th of March. And then we have Courage and Moral Leadership by Bachan, sorry, Jones, Palmer, and Duku on the 22nd of March. Those are two chapters that deal specifically with the, um, the ethical aspect of the model. And in fact, a good bit of your midterm exercise, reflection exercise, is going to be based off of those chapters as well. All right. Okay. So let's look at let's examine this a little more. A lot of people differentiate between ethics and morals, right? So we know, however, they seem to be interchangeable, but let's look at where we are, what we're looking at. So ethics is the social rules that govern and limit our conduct, especially the ultimate rules concerning what is right and wrong. Ethics comes from the word ethos, which is from the Greek word for character and sentiment of the community. Other definitions of ethics includes the con, principles of conduct governing an individual or a profession, and a standard of behavior. So some of you all may be working in organizations or in professions that have um, ethical principles or operational standards, that type of stuff, and would be familiar with those terminologies. So basically, here we're talking about human behavior and what people should be doing based upon the standards of behavior expected around us. So there's certain things that are expected of us that we should be doing. That's the type of thing that ethics was referring to. Being ethical means that you're conforming to the standards of a given profession or group, and any group can set its own ethical standards and then live by them or not. So one of the things that happened after the 2008 and 2010 financial crisis in the United States, and of course that affected the whole world, was that the accounting fraternity through large associations like the ACCA and so on got involved in upgrading their ethical training components in their programs and started to do ethical professional training and that type of stuff. And they rewrote their standards for ethical practices in accounting activities because there was so much um, negative things ascribed to the behavior of accountants that was considered legal, that proved to be absolutely unethical in the way in which they approach certain things. So, you found a lot of attention being addressed to business activities and leadership in general, um, as a as opposed to other things. I mean that we look around in terms of general ethical values and morality. All right, so ethical standards, whether established by an individual or an organization, guides how we behave. For the purpose of this model, ethics will be defined as the rules or standards that govern behaviors. So that's the nature of what we're doing. Principles like values, ethics, standards, and morals provide true north directions to our lives when navigating the streams of our environment. So that simply means that these values and principles that exist around us is supposed to be what guides our behavior. All right, professions obviously have to set up this behavior, especially if they find that there's been some sort of negative change in behaviors. So they try to reestablish a true north, um, you know, for us to be following. But that's something that you want to pay attention. So as opposed to ethics, morals means relating to the principles of right and wrong, or arising from one's conscience or sense of good and evil, pertaining to the discernment of good and evil, instructive of what is good or evil. So everything here in moral values has to speak to differentiating between what's good and what's bad. All right, morals are commonly thought to be influenced by religion and personal beliefs. And moral leadership is concerned with good leadership, that is, leadership with good means, and good ends. All right, so get a little more distinction between morals and moral values. So this leadership model is one that they refer to as being values driven. So the relational leadership model is one that is going to be values driven. And that's important for us to recognize because it's it sits upon an understanding that a lot of the ethical, a lot of the problems that leadership faces in the modern environment is the fact that it seems to be um, values, well, instead of being values driven, it they say it's values neutral, and that's one of the problems when you engage in leadership. You can't be values neutral, at least not from the relational leadership model, because we do have to work in the context of the world around us, and this is where the context becomes an important element. What is the context in which we're operating? What's the country we're operating in? What's the environment we're operating in? Those contexts is driven by the values, or can be seen through the values and ethical and moral values that govern the behavior in those areas. So that's the nature of what this is about. The ethical values define the context in which we're going to find ourselves actively engaging in. All right. The problems that we're gonna have here would be where personal or individual values and ethics um, conflict with organizational. Now, if any of you all have ever experienced an issue with that, where your personal um, values conflict directly with an organizational value, um, you would be experiencing something that psychologists and sociologists refer to as cognitive dissonance. It's something you feel inside. It kind of hits you as you know, it feels wrong, but you have to do it because they say you have to do this. And that cognitive dissonance creates a situation in which if you find yourself operating in an organization when that feeling comes up too often, or you start to encounter that cognitive dissonance, I would recommend that you get out of that profession or get out of that organization, because it means that eventually you're going to run into some, either it's going to cause you to dramatically change your values, um, or you're going to constantly have um, health issues coming up as a result of having that conflict, because what's happening in your brain there is absolute conflict in terms of what you're doing and what you believe in, and that's something that you don't want to be having that type of conflict taking place in your organization. You know where you can see some of those things is in some of those movies where you see lawyers behaving in, and here Christopher comes to mind. You see lawyers defending, you know, people who appear to be out and out guilty of some activity. This is especially in criminal activities. Could happen in civil matters as well. And you see lawyers, you know, really going to town, defending somebody, pulling out all the tricks and winning for the individual. But at the end of the day, the lawyers or the society views what the lawyer is doing as being absolutely disgraceful, because they're protecting somebody who they know or is known or suspected at least, or the evidence simply proves that they did this particular thing, but there's insufficient evidence to provide, without a shadow of a doubt kind of thing. So you find that there's this issue where sometimes you're in a job where there's a disconnect between what you're doing and what you feel, and that is one of the things that society looks at. And because they oftentimes portray lawyers like these sleazy people who have questionable moral values and stuff like that. And if you all ever looked at that film Suits, that series I should say, Suits, a lot of questionable activity took place there. Yeah, Christopher. Yeah, I really enjoyed that. Like a lot of lying and deceit. Of course, that's a film, so they use that as a technique for developing drama. But it really does speak to some ethical challenges that people feel. And you look at any medical drama, for example. Again, that's another place in which you find a lot of ethical values and other ethical dilemmas coming up, um, especially where there's personal disconnect with what's going on around you. That is a challenge. If you find yourself as in an organization like that, get out of that organization as fast as you can, because you're not going to. It's not going to do you any good to work in an organization like that. All right. So the big issue here is though is sometimes there is a sense that when ethical values or moral behavior is heavily religiously based, it creates a challenge working in a contemporary environment. Um, and that in itself can lead to cognitive dissonance as well. Because some churches, for example, or some religious bodies have very strict attitudes towards the treatment of certain types of individuals. And this is people with diversity we're talking about here. Um, and that can lead to a disconnect between the model that we're looking at and what you're willing to put up with. And again, I have to say to you, you have to work within the model, the environment that you're operating in, um, and know or understand what you're doing in terms of what is good and what is bad, that type of stuff. Um, and make pull your own make your own decisions based on it, because at the end of the day, um, people are not being as forgiving as they were before. Because I mean, understand, when we look at politicians and the political environment around us, I mean, do we consider most of these guys in politics as being ethical people, moral people? I don't know. They don't look that way to me from where I sit. They look as if all they're concerned about is their own self-development and whatever's necessary for them. Have I ever met a selfless politician? I think I know one, or knew of one, and he eventually resigned from the post because he felt he wasn't doing a good job. That was really weird. Um, all right, so I can't emphasize enough, and I think you all can. I will stop at this point because I want to get to the last point before we run out of time. About the importance of ethical and moral values and its importance in the model. We're going to spend a fair amount of time going through these things in the two presentations that are coming up there. So it's important that we pay attention to when we have problems, because ethical dilemmas is something that is almost constant in life. You're going to have to look at the tools necessary to deal with dilemmas from your own personal standpoint, as well as from um, what is likely to come up in front of you in the future. All right. So that's something that you want to pay attention to. Un- get to understand where you sit when it comes to your morals and or your ethical values. All right. And let those things guide your decision making. So an exercise that you can engage in is asking yourself, what do you stand for, and how far are you willing to go to advance anything that you see as being good for everybody? What are you willing to do to do the right thing? That's an interesting question. How far am I willing to go to advance the common good or to do the right thing? That's interesting. And this is where you're going to come across things like post-conventional and conventional behaviors and stuff like that. All right, so I'll leave these out in terms of modeling the way. Of course, as a leader, you have to lead by example because what you do, and it has to be what you do, not only what you say. They have to be concurrent, meaning that what you do and what you say is the same thing or fall along the same lines. If you don't behave that way, then your actions are going to speak louder than your words. We always talk about that. Your actions speaking louder than your words, and that's actually quite true. All right. So in essence, what we're saying is that in order for you to be a good leader, you have to have good ethical values. And unfortunately, ethical values is not something that, well, it's not something you could go tinkering with too often. Because once you get caught with your integrity being questionable, it's kind of hard to fix that. All right. Okay, so the last element here is about the process. So the leadership model is a process driven model. And why is anything process oriented? At the end of the day, this whole last section here about process is about it being repeatable so that we can involve ourselves in the process of relational leadership development. And because we're using a process oriented, there's a greater opportunity for that process to be successful across the board. So once we have a process approach to this thing, it's likely to be more likely to be accomplished. So that is why we refer to it as process driven. If we don't approach it from a process orientation, then there's a great likelihood that you're going to find that you're going to skip things, you're going to be haphazardly trying to develop your leadership potential, and that then creates a bit of a problem. All right. Same thing. Like you don't go through the process of developing your vision and mission statement, utilizing a socialized approach. Then you're going to create a personalized vision, which you're trying to force down other people. So those are the things that we talk about. Creating a process so that uh, um, we don't miss anything, and we run the option of being able to correct it if we do make a mistake along the way. All right. So that's why everything is going to be process oriented in terms of the relational leadership model. Um, the the process is something that's going to guide our development throughout the particular activity, and we need to be careful that the process is not seen as being more important than the people. That's something um, that we have to pay attention to, because sometimes in businesses, process is seen as being more important than the people. That's actually something that happens in Costat a lot. Um, just to indicate, we were talking about admissions registration activities for the last semester, and there are a couple of processes that are put in place for certain types of activities like course overrides and standing academic standing petition forms. And those processes, you have to follow them to get people in their class, right? And when you follow those, they're so faulty, it's not funny, and people get frustrated. They have to redo their ad drops and all kind of. There's a whole host of things, and that's where the process is becoming more important than the people, and that is that's where you need to review your process and fix it, and put the emphasis on the people involved and not the process that's involved. That's something that came to mind today. We had a meeting today about a lot of stuff in the college. All right, so we're going to be looking at several essential elements of the process, meaning making. So we spoke about this a little bit. Um, Meaning making means that the process has to mean something to you, and the program, this leadership model, has to mean something to you. If it doesn't mean anything to you, then you're likely to not bother with it. If it's not meaningful, you're not going to get involved with it. All right, that's a really important element that we want to talk to. The other thing that we have to do in this process is we need to evaluate the process at any point in time, because we need to make sure that in the process we are doing things in a particular way, but it's not the only way to get things done. So we have to ask that question is, can this be done better? Can we approach this differently and do it more efficiently? Those are things that help us to, tweak the process so that it gets, more efficient in nature. Cooperation and collaboration. The process sits upon the understanding that cooperation and collaboration is superior than competition. Now, traditional approaches to leadership always focus on competition because the phrase or the thinking is competition brings the best out of people. The reality is that adversarial systems or processes create shortcuts. It encourages cheating and it encourages unethical behavior. In fact, research indicates that cooperation and collaboration are far superior in utilizing it when you're developing things like this. Competition might work for uh, for free market systems, but not necessarily to the benefit of everybody around us. All right. Part of the things that we could look at in terms of economics is how the free market system is very wasteful. But that's what this system is saying. Cooperation and collaboration is part of the process rather than competing with people for the same sets of activities, because we're just kind of cheating each other out and kind of pushing people around, and it encourages cheating as well. That's something that goes without saying. All right. Okay. Next element is you all can go through this in more details. You can download it from the e-classroom. Although I know this week we were having some problems with it. We spoke already about meaning making, and for this thing to matter to you, it has to matter in two areas. It has to matter to you in terms of your intellect, and it also has to matter to you in terms of your emotional connection to it. We we when we have a emotional connection to something and it means something to you, it's a good idea, it's a good thought or good concept, then we're going to be more committed to it and we're going to be more passionate about it. And that's the key thing about meaning making here. We need that you as individuals to look at this process, look at the concept of relational leadership, and understand that it is important. You agree with the concepts, and that it means something to you from an emotional standpoint, because that way you'd be more invested in the development of yourself as a relational in this relational leadership model. All right. So um, So this is meaning making here in terms of a flowchart, data becoming information, processed into knowledge, that knowledge leading to a development of understanding, that understanding leading to wisdom and growth, and that drives our thoughts and actions and cycles backwards and forwards from that. All right. Okay. So uh, let's look at reflection and contemplation. One of the last areas here. One of the key areas that we have to pay attention to is the development and the practice of reflecting and contemplation. All right, so reflection is the process of pausing, stepping back from the actions, and asking, what is happening? Why is this happening? What does this mean? What does it mean for me? What can I learn from this? All right, so these are some really nice questions for you to utilize in terms of reflecting on things, because too often we're the the pace at which the world is revolving around us, and the way in which your jobs are working, and even your home life and stuff like that, there isn't sufficient time for us to stop and reflect in a meaningful way. Not talking about just on your drive home thinking about things. You're talking about sitting down and kind of going through this process. So again, To help you with that, there is an assignment in this course for you to do some reflection and contemplation, both the self-assessment and the self-analysis and the reflections and leadership plan, part of that thing, that whole process. Now, reflections can't only be on negative aspects of what took place. We also should focus on both negatives and positives. Spend more time looking at your positives as well, because we need to know what works, why it works, and ensure that we understand why it works so that we can repeat it again and again. So, because one of the things that we tend to do a lot is that we tend to focus heavily on our on negatives rather than the positives, and that's a normal human reaction. When we start to look at ourselves, we always see the worst of us. We don't necessarily see the best of us, and that's something um, that we need to avoid. All right. So I like this. Teach people to let go their superficial mental chatter and obsessions. Teach people to pay attention to the whole body's reaction to a situation. That's something that we've learned over time. And if we were to, this speaks me to something that happens a lot. When we first come across somebody or first meet them, we have a reaction to them, but we tend to belittle that action or ignore that reaction, and then later down the road, that reaction comes back because of things that happen with the individual, and you suspect that what you felt about that person to begin with was absolutely correct. That has to do with our inability to want to accept that our instinct about people is generally going to be correct. Our initial instinct to people, we don't trust it anymore. We've lost our confidence in treating with that type of thing. So it's something that you should probably think about. Um, Check this statement here: metacognition, um, thinking about one's thinking, now considered essential for effective learning and problem solving. So you have to think about how you go about thinking. That it sounds um, like tautology, basically, and kind of circular logic, but you have to think about how you think. That's an interesting aspect of part of the reflection. That's why I say reflection is not something you can just do on a drive home kind of situation. You can start the process, but um, you need to really spend a little more time going through and doing that reflection. It's kind of important, all right? And as I spoke about before, look not only at your failures, but also look at your successes. Why did this go so well? What did we do together to make it happen? How can we make sure this works again in the future? So those are the kind of things that we have to be looking at when it comes to reflection. The phrase retreat, renewal, and return, that's something that a lot of organizations used to be doing, but I don't hear about it very often now. I know we used to do it in Costa, but we don't have the budget to do it anymore, the time. But we do have a lot of we do get together and kind of do some reflection, but not in a major way as it used to be in the late 90s and stuff. That whole retreat activities. You saw governments doing it and all kind of stuff too. I don't know, any of you all here work in organizations that still do retreats and reflections, or they found it was expensive and not useful.
So my
Nobody?
firm still do. So my firm still does retreats and reflections and stuff like that.
Yeah.
We
How
call it
how
Grenco.
how big is your organization, size wise?
Um, Size wise, it's lawyers and overall staff. It's about 25.
Right. So that's a relatively small organization, and I guess you all could all go to a little event somewhere or place and have a little get together and that type of stuff and do some collective action, and it's not going to cost a hell of a lot of money. But consider the sizes of organizations that have gotten hundreds of people in it, sometimes up to 1,500 people. That's going to be a really expensive exercise, which is one of the reasons why it's become a bit impractical to do reflection and contemplation in that kind of group set. Doesn't mean that individual departments and individual groupings can't do this. And more importantly, it's essential for you as an individual, especially if you're in a leadership position, to exercise yourself during this reflection and do this reflection and contemplation on your own. Do some cognitive reflection as well. Um, if you're already a leader, invite so many people in your organization to do, little sessions on reflection. Pick an area, pick an activity, and kind of really do a reflection on that, because you may not be able to handle your reflections in a all undone kind of situation, but focusing on certain aspects of the the organization's process and actions might help. It may not be the holistic type of reflection, but get into the habit of it, because it's hard. I mean, how many of you all here used to write diaries when you were growing up? A dear diary kind of thing. With the way, or keep journals.
Without being forced to, sir?
Yeah, without being forced
Okay, now.
to. But did you do a journal because you were asked to do one?
Yeah.
Who asked you? A teacher or your parents?
We had like a guidance counselor who used to come and we had to like do something. I think it was every month or 3 weeks.
They used to read your journals.
Uh, if they used to read it,
Yeah.
I don't
They sh-
think they used to read it. They
no,
said they
no,
never read it.
no, they shouldn't. The journals are inherently extremely private, huh?
Yeah,
Do
they
you
never.
still, do you still have your journals? You should probably go back and read it. See what you thought of yourself back then. Read.
If I could find it, if I could find it.
You see, no valuation at all. All right, guys. So we've gone through the model. We know that the model is a five-piece model. It sits on a process orientation, and we know that it encompasses a purpose. Um, we have to be inclusive. We have to be empowering. And what was the last thing? Anybody who's paying attention? Let's see. What was
So we have
the
to be ethical.
very good? Somebody was listening. So you have to have all five of those elements in the process and be process driven around it to be a good leader. That's what the model is all about. So I know there's a lot of stuff that we went through, and some of the stuff I kind of sped through coming down to the end here. What I want to say to you is that you're free to download this off the e-classroom. You can also go and read a chapter, but I don't need you to memorize stuff. All right. Um, I don't need you to go on. What I would need you to do is to really work with the material and kind of, as I said, distill key points and ideas and arguments. Reflect on them and think about yourself as a leader and the kind of leadership you would like to exhibit. And let it suggest to you what you're going to take from this model and how you're going to let this model influence you moving forward. All right. Any questions about this?
No, sir, that's a lot to take in.
It is. I know. I definitely would agree with you. That's a lot to take in. Um, and it's not necessarily a negative thing. I see a comment here that I didn't get. All right. Yeah, it is a lot. And as I said, it's not meant to be a negative thing, but it is a lot of content to go through, and that's what I'm saying. Some chapters are like, well, so this chapter is really long because of the entire process it went through in terms of trying to describe all the critical aspects of the relational leadership model. Now that we've done that, there are other presentations that will try to drill out certain sections that were already gone through. So we have the understanding self, understanding others, the ethical values part. Then the working together is going to come up with teams and groups and being in communities and complex organizations. Then we're going to add um, some more elements from the DAF where we look at vision and strategic direction. We're going to look at power and influence to investigate that a little further. And of course, we're going to close off on leading change. So you can see the connection between chapter 3 and the rest of the presentations on the rest of the chapters from these textbooks. All right. Okay, so no critical questions. People need some time to reflect. So as I said, you can down. I actually think I loaded it into. Somebody was asking about it last class, and I think I loaded this presentation into the WhatsApp chat because somebody was saying they wanted to get it and they weren't able to download it. So I I added it there, so you can always download it from there as well. All right. Okay, no questions. All right. Let me pause the recording.